The following is a reading by novelist, playwright, and essayist James Baldwin, recorded for the American Audio Prose Library in April of 1984 in Amherst, Massachusetts, where he's now teaching. James Baldwin was born in Harlem in 1924. His childhood and adolescence there have been chronicled in his first novel, Go Tell It on the Mountain, and in his landmark essay, Notes of a Native Son. As his readers know, Baldwin was the oldest of 9 children, the son of a minister, and became a teenage evangelist himself after a religious crisis at 14, which was precipitated by the accidental discovery that his father was not in fact his biological parent, and that he'd been born out of wedlock. But after 2 years he left the church and began writing again. Shortly thereafter he was befriended by Richard Wright, author of Native Son, and eventually, in 1948, at the age of 24, James Baldwin, following the lead of Richard Wright and many another black artist during those times, went to Paris to live, where he was able to get the distance he needed from the American racial climate to successfully commence his writing life, with Go Tell It on the Mountain coming out in 1953. He came home in 1958 out of the need to see how things were here now, and even traveled south for the first time during the heat of the Civil Rights Movement. But he's continued to live in France over the years, coming back to the United States for periodic visits. In the meantime, his 7 novels, 3 plays, 2 collections of short stories, 5 volumes of essays, and various other works have earned Baldwin the reputation as one of our most important men of letters, certainly as the writer on the subject of black and white America. And many readers think him to be one of the finest essayists in the English language. But all his novels, except for Go Tell It on the Mountain, have been extremely controversial, the primary criticism being that they grow too much out of his ideas about race relations and homosexuality, another of his primary concerns, and are thus too polemical at the expense of other aesthetic considerations. Whether that's true or not is for time to tell, but the fact is that for his essays alone, along with the quality of his mind, James Baldwin is already one of those writers by whom the 20th century will be defined in generations to come. The following reading is from Baldwin's 1979 novel, Just Above My Head.
This is James Baldwin, and I'm going to read 2 passages from my novel, Just Above My Head. This is the opening of the novel. The damned blood burst, first through his nostrils, then pounded through the veins in his neck. The scarlet torrent exploded through his mouth. It reached his eyes and blinded him, and brought Arthur down, 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 down. The telephone call did not go into these details, neither did the telegram, urgently demanding my arrival because my brother was dead. The laconic British press merely noted that a nearly forgotten Negro moaner and groaner, that is how the British press described my brother, had been found dead in a men's room in the basement of a London pub. No one told me how he died. The American press noted the passing of an emotion-filled gospel singer, dead at the untidy age of 39. He had been losing his hair, that rainforest of Senegalese hair. I knew that. I sat by the telephone. I looked at the marvel of human effort, the telephone. The telephone beside my bed was black. Like me, I think, I thought. God knows why I thought it, if I did. The telephone in the bathroom was gray. The telephone in the kitchen was blue, light blue. The sun was shining that morning like I'd never known the sun to shine before. He'd been found lying in a pool of blood. Why does one say a pool? A storm, a violence, a miracle of blood. His blood, my brother's blood, my brother's blood, my brother's blood. My blood, my brother's blood, my blood, Arthur's blood, soaking into the sawdust of some grimy men's room in the basement of some filthy London pub. Oh, no. Arthur. I think I laughed. I think I couldn't cry. My brother. The house was empty. Ruth was out shopping. Tony and Odessa were at school. It was a Sunday morning. My brother. Do you know, friend, how a brother loves his brother? How mighty, how unanswerable it is to be confronted with the truth beneath that simple word. Simple word. Yes. No. Everything becomes unanswerable, unreadable, in the face of an event yet more unimaginable than one's own death. It is one's death, occurring far beyond the confines of one's imagination. Or surely far beyond the confines of my imagination. And do you know how much my brother loved me? How much he loved me? And do you know I did not know it? Did not dare to know it? Do you know? No, no, no. I looked and looked and looked at the telephone. I looked at the telephone and I looked at the telephone. The telephone was silent. This was the black telephone. I stumbled to the gray telephone in the bathroom. Perhaps I thought that it might have mercy on me if I humbled myself on the toilet. Nothing came out of me, not even water, and the phone did not ring. I walked to the light blue telephone in the kitchen and looked at it and looked at it. It looked at me from somewhere over the light blue rainbow, and it did not ring. It did not ring. It did not ring. It did not ring. How can you do this to me? How can you tell me what you just told me? And I'll sit there like that. Oh, if you were a man like me. Oh, oh. Arthur, speak. I know. I wasn't always nice to you. I yelled when I shouldn't have yelled. I was often absent when I should have been present. I know. And sometimes you bore the shit out of me. And I heard your stories too often. And I knew all your fucking little ways, man. How you jive the people. But that's not really true. You didn't really jive the people. You sang. And you sang. And if there was any jiving done, the people jived you, my brother. Because they didn't know that they were the song. And the price of the song. And the glory of the song. You sang. Oh, my God. Oh, my God. Oh, my God. Oh, no, my God. Forsake me if you will, but give me back my brother. I did not cry. Nothing came out of me, not even water. I stood as dumb and naked as a horse under the shower. I dried myself and I shaved, very, very slowly, very, very carefully. I was shaving someone else. I looked into my eyes. They were someone else's eyes. I combed my hair. The phone did not ring. Soon I would have to pick it up, dial a number, and get on a plane. London Bridge is falling down. My fair lady. Ruth saw me naked, flat on my back, on the bathroom floor, my razor in my hand, and the phone was ringing. 2 years ago, if Arthur were alive now, he would be approaching 41. I am the older brother, and I will be 48 this year. My name is Hall Montana. I was born in California, but Arthur was born in New York, and we grew up in New York. Our father, Paul, died several years back. Died, I think, having crossed the continent to find himself in New York. He'd been born in Tallahassee, grew up in New Orleans, and had had a tough, rough time in California. He died anyway, while Arthur was still Arthur, thank God. He split the seam before Arthur started down. Florence, our mother, once Arthur was in the ground, went back to New Orleans, where she and Paul had met, and she's staying there now with one of her younger sisters. Ruth and myself and the kids try to make it down there for a couple of weeks every summer. And sometimes I bring Mama up here for Christmas. But she doesn't like it up here. Maybe she never did. But now when she visits, I can feel her flinching. She doesn't say anything. The pain is at the very bottom of her eyes. I catch it sometimes when she's just sitting still, looking at television, or looking out of the window, or sometimes when she's walking along the street. She doesn't like to go to church up here. She says that the people here don't have any spirit, that their religion ain't nothing but noise and show. They've lost the true religion. That may be true. I don't go to church myself. But even if what she says is true, and I remember, too, how those people treated Arthur when he branched out from gospel, that's not the reason. Any church up here might have Jesus on the main line, all day and all night long, and Mama would never so lower herself as to go anywhere near that phone. No, never. She doesn't like this city because it robbed her of her son, and she feels that the people in the church, when they turned against him, became directly responsible for his death. She goes to church down home, though, where she can grieve and pray, away from all the spiteful people whose tongues so lacerated her boy. She can sing to herself without fear of being mocked, and find strength and solace in the song that says, "They didn't know who you were." And she's not singing about Jesus then, she's singing about her son. Maybe all gospel songs begin out of blasphemy and presumption, what the church would call blasphemy and presumption. Adventuring God's suffering and making it your own. Adventuring your suffering and challenging God Almighty to have or to give or to withhold mercy. There will be two of us at the mercy seat, my Lord and I. 2 years ago, and I've never really talked about it. Not to Ruth, not to my children, Tony and Odessa, who love their uncle. Not to Julia, not to Jimmy. And they can't talk about it until I can talk. I know I'm wrong to trap them in my silence. Maybe it's partly because I was Arthur's manager. I had to talk about him for years living, and then dead as a property, as a star. I had to protect him, because Lord have mercy, that nappy-headed mother did not know how to protect himself. That made me afraid that I'd lose him as my brother. They would think that I also thought of him as a can of beans anybody could buy and which everybody sold. And down the river, baby, at a mighty handsome profit. I don't think that he thought of me that way. I know he didn't. If he had, he would have died much sooner. I know it because I know that he never tried to hide anything from me, though sometimes he tried to protect me, too. I know I loved him, and he knew it. With all my heart, I loved him. Even when it made me so mad sometimes, I felt like I wanted to beat his brains out. He made his life so hard. Well, that's not true either. He lived the life he lived, like anybody, I guess. And he paid his dues, like everybody. Maybe what I mean when I say he made his life so hard was that he always tried to pay his dues in front. That isn't always possible. It can even be called a bad habit. Maybe some dues are paid. Some dues may be just a bad memory. But you can't really take that for granted unless you can trust your memory. The truth, anyway, is that I wouldn't really give a shit about all these abstract speculations if I weren't trying to talk about my brother. He was on stage. He caught the light, and so I saw him, more clearly than I will ever see myself. I had this dream this morning, this Sunday morning, just as I was beginning to come up out of this cave of sleep. Just at the moment, down in that cave, I heard Ruth sigh and turned toward me, and in my sleep, but beginning to rise up out of it, I turned toward her. But the dream still held me. Me and Arthur and Jimmy and Julia were all someplace together, some insane place like Disneyland or Coney Island. But the children weren't with us. It was night, and Jimmy said something to Arthur, something funny which I didn't catch. Because at that exact moment, I felt Ruth move. I kind of shifted my weight so that Ruth could move as she pleased, closer to me, closer. I was waiting. Arthur answered Jimmy, and Julia held between them a donut covered with white icing, and Ruth put her head on my chest, and my hand got tangled in Ruth's hair. Julia threw the donut way up in the air. Then my mother came along. She was carrying some breakfast dishes, and she said, "You better let that donut stay up yonder where it belongs. You don't know donuts like I know donuts." Then we all went away to the country. I was in a wagon going up a hill. There were lots of trees on the hill. Arthur was in the road, with his big shoes flapping in the dust. He was running to catch up with the wagon. He was just a little boy, about 5, and he was crying, and snot was coming out his nose. I was trying to stop the wagon, but I didn't know how. I couldn't make the driver hear me. Every time I tried to crawl to the back of the wagon to bang on the window of the cab and beg the driver to stop and let me pick up my brother, the truck shook and zigzagged all over the road, and it threw me from side to side. Arthur was still running and crying, and the trees were moving right behind him. Some trees had moved right up to it, right up close beside him, and a few trees were a little bit ahead of him. I decided to jump off the wagon and grab for a tree to break my fall, but the tree moved aside. I grabbed for another tree, but this tree knocked me back against the cab window. I was determined to jump, and I crawled forward on my face and belly to the front of the wagon, but then the truck leaped upward, starting down a steep hill, throwing me all the way back again. The trees were laughing. I could still hear Arthur screaming. I crawled up to the very edge of the wagon, and the wagon rushed down this hill, and then water rose over my head, gray, salty water. My mother measured some baking soda into a cup. She said no, not like I know, and lowered the heat on the biscuit in the oven. Let's say about a year or so after all this, I had a fight on my job with some snot-nosed, red-headed white boy who thought it was fun to call me Shine. And I'd been real nice about it, let me tell you. And when I say I was being nice, I mean that I could see that this brainless, Andy Hardy, Democratic Republican didn't know that he could lose his life. He didn't even mean any harm. He was just having fun the way he'd been taught to have fun. Poor slob, the next time he called me Shine. "Hurry up, Shine, hurry up." I didn't tell him no more. I was on top of the ladder, working loose one of those bolts of cloth which weigh about 2 tons. You have to be very careful with it. The man on the ladder must lower this bolt of cloth very carefully to the man on the ground. The bolt of cloth is horizontal as you work it loose. It must be lowered vertically into the arms of the man on the ground. The trick is to shift this weight into a vertical position as you work it loose. And since you got your back turned to the man on the ground, he's got to be ready when you start to slide the cloth down the ladder. This time, when the child called me Shine, I just worked the bolt of cloth loose, but he didn't know it. I lifted it and dropped it and turned around on the ladder, just in time to see his face as it missed him. If it had hit him, it would have broken his neck. I'll never forget his eyes. He didn't know what he'd done to make me try to kill him. And because he didn't know what he'd done, I came off the ladder and tried to kill him. It's a dreadful place to be. I've been there a few times since. Hope never to have to go there again. There is a blood-red thunder all around you. A blinding light flashes from time to time. Voices roar and cease, roar and cease. You are in the grip of an unknowable agony. It is in your shoulders, your arms, your hands, your breath, an intolerable labor. And no, it is not at all like approaching an orgasm implying relief, even sometimes, however desperately, implying the hope of love. Love and death are connected, but not in the place I was that day. Somebody dragged me off him. The boy was a bloody, bewildered mess. I felt an absolutely intolerable grief and shame. The poor child didn't know. He didn't know. 2 lives had nearly been lost, and on those 2 lives, many others depended, because he didn't know. I didn't lose my job miraculously. But looking at it coldly, it probably wasn't miraculous at all. I was simply a more valuable worker and cheaper than the white boy. I apologized to the child. I was even willing to help him wash up, but they gave me the rest of the day off. I worked on 39th Street. I walked up 7th Avenue, intending to go to a movie on 42nd Street. But by the time I got there, I really didn't have the heart to go to a movie, and so I just kept walking. Not for the first time, but then again, maybe really for the first time, I wondered what I was to do with my life. I walked through the city. I just was not able to get into a bus or a subway. I walked home. It was about 6 in the evening. When I got to Harlem, I realized that it had been a nice spring day. It was April. I heard the piano playing as I got to my floor, and I was happy that Paul was home. I walked in through the door, which led to the kitchen. There was no one in that part of the house. I walked through the 2 bedrooms to the living room. There were Paul, Peanut, and Arthur, and Peanut was at the piano. Arthur stood beside Peanut singing. Paul stood behind them, keeping the beat with 1 foot, and Peanut was trying to follow the beat. That gospel train is coming, I heard it close at hand. I hear the engines trembling and rumbling through the land. Arthur sang, and now, Paul grunted, but Peanut fumbled on the keys. Paul leaned over him and struck a chord. If you do that, then you can get here. He struck another chord. Home free. And then hit it, Arthur. Get on board, little children. Get, Paul grunted. On board, little children. Get on board, little children. There's room for many and more. They all laughed, and Paul said, you almost made it that time, son. But don't be in a hurry when you play. If you don't let it take the time it takes, then you ain't got no time. You see what I mean? Peanut nodded, his forehead vivid with tension and coated with sweat. He sat with his hands between his knees, staring at the keyboard. They might have been there all afternoon or for days. No one had yet noticed that I was in the room. You worry too much about the beat, but the beat comes out of the time, the space between one note and the next note. And you got to trust the time you hear. That's how you play your song. Peanut turned on the piano stool, and the 2 boys stared up at Paul, both drenched in the fading sunlight, which poured on them through the window. Heavy black Paul was in profile to me in silhouette. The 2 boys looked up at him in absolute belief and wonder. Peanut's forehead was still tormented. Will you give me lessons, he asked. Arthur looked at Peanut and then up at Paul. There was a fascinating collision in his face of jealousy and pride. "I am no teacher," Paul said. Peanut blushed and dropped his eyes, and his hands fell between his knees again. "I know," he said, "but..." Paul said, "If you want to drop by some evening, early, like now, I'll run over the keys with you." "I sure would appreciate that," said Peanut. "I would sure appreciate that, sir." And he wanted to say more, but didn't know how, and Paul, embarrassed, turned and saw me. I looked into his eyes, and we smiled. I was so glad to see him, my father, my old man. I thought of the boy who called me Shine, but my father knew about him already, had known him from a long ways off. "You're home early," my father said. Arthur and Peanut stared at me, but said nothing. "It was a rough day," I said, "down yonder in the dungeon. But everything will be all right if you'll just sit down at that piano and play us a little something." Paul gave me a look. Peanut moved from the piano stool. Peanut and Arthur stood by the window, and I sat down on the chair by the door. Paul played Dukes Across the Track Blues. The boys at the window, me in the chair. Paul with slick down hair as the day began to fade, and the Duke, from wherever he was, smiling all over his face. I don't want to give the impression that I was at all grown up then, because I wasn't. And I'm not sure I'm grown up now. But I'm one of those people who have always had to seem to be grown up. This aspect of her husband has probably contributed to Ruth's sense of humor. Like Peanut, I was trying to get it together. I was luckier than Peanut because I had my mother and father, and I had Arthur. But Arthur, I did not know this then, was a double-edged sword. One's little brother begins his life, you think, within the sturdy gates of one's imagination. He is what you think he is. He is everything that you are not. And he is, though you will never tell him this, much better, more beautiful, and more valuable than you. This is because you are here already, and he has just arrived. You have been used already, and he is newborn. You are dirty, and he is clean. You want the moon for your brother. You have forgotten that you must once have wanted it for yourself. Your life can now be written anew on the empty slate of his. What a burden to give your little brother. Ah, I saw myself in Arthur. I forgot that we were brothers, and that he could also see himself in me. I might have shriveled and grown old if I could have seen what he was seeing. Well, this is love just the same, however we warp or weave it. Love forces at last this humility. You cannot love if you cannot be loved. You cannot see if you cannot be seen. What was Arthur seeing? I was a fairly good-looking, skinny kid of 20. With a little light stealing here and there, I kept myself in fine clothes. Fairly fine clothes. I wasn't crazy. Didn't, for example, pay down in the car and then sleep in it. I loved my mother and my father. That helps. I didn't want to be a bad example to Arthur, and that helps. But I was scared. My future dropped before me like a swamp. I clung to night school. I kept my job. I had one girl after another. Youth must be the worst time in anybody's life. Everything's happening for the first time, which means that sorrow then lasts forever. Later you can see that there was something very beautiful in it. That's because you ain't got to go through it no more. There are some days, the order of a moment, or the moment you turn the corner, say, into a street which you do not remember, and which yet you will never forget, or seeing a figure leap from a bus, or watching a boy and a girl hand in hand, or sometimes seeing a small child smiling face to the sky, or a tree, or a sky, or the sky, or a stone can make you ache, as though no time had passed, and the first time you saw love, the first time love saw you. The light that's in your eyes reminds me of the skies that shine above us every day. The first love disappears but never goes. That ache becomes reconciliation. But then, for example, I drank. But young people don't really drink, they swallow. It's only later that the liquid you pour down your throat backs up. Ah, then you walk, you eat, you vomit, you stink. Demons drag you out to sleep, you shudder awake. You get it together and you make the scene. You tell little brother how everything's cool. He says for true, and he's watching you. Here comes Crunch. He was big, the biggest boy in what was to become the Trumpets of Zion Quartet. If thunder could be seen, then I imagined that thunder would look like Crunch. And so would Innocence. He owned several plantations of very thick, tangled black hair, a wide nose, which seemed somehow both aggressive and abused, heavy lips, a beautiful grin, lots of white teeth perfectly straight. He was skinny but powerful, played basketball, and was the boy who made out best with the ladies, his term. The term conveyed his bewilderment. Some men and some women appear to be born for the purpose of igniting desire. It appears to be their function. It is taken for granted that their intention is to fulfill desire, your desire, and that their smile or their look is meant to convey this intention. It is not their intention at all. They have very probably barely noticed you, and are too innocent to be able to imagine what you are imagining. These people are treated with an unbelievable brutality. Brutality made all the more hideous by presenting itself as love. And in my experience at least, these people who are the objects of a lust, at once abstract and consuming, rarely know how to defend themselves. They do not know until too late that they have any reason to defend themselves. This is because of that invincible innocence. And less innocent, they will be less attractive. To rouse innocence to an utterly brutal, pounding passion is a fantasy rooted in everybody's nature. It makes the head spin. Perhaps it makes the earth spin. What is lacking in every fantasy is that sweat of love, which is called respect. I'm tired, Crunch was to say to me much later, for he was King Kong in a jockstrap, poor boy, dribbling the ball down the court, striding the avenue, patting children on the head, helping old ladies and blind men to cross the street. He was a beautiful person, manhandled, smashed. He was the oldest of 5 children, 3 girls, 2 boys. Their fathers came and went. Their mother was, in the main, a barman. His name was Jason Hogan, and he had been born in New York City. Red was his best friend, was in fact a distant cousin, and they had grown up together. Crunch called Red his heart, and he meant it. A Saturday afternoon. Crunch has the guitar. Paul is at the piano. Peanut, Red, and Arthur stand behind him. Crunch stands to the side. It is early December. The streets are empty, and the air is icy with the threat of Christmas. Christmas. They are to make their debut, Christmas morning, in our church on Edgecombe Avenue. One of the reasons that we attend this church is because of Paul's following on Sugar Hill. But Paul does not play piano in this church. The church would not approve, except when Arthur sings. He doesn't always play for Arthur, and almost never plays for Arthur in any other church. He didn't carry Arthur around the way Brother Joe Miller carried Julia around. He took a very distant attitude toward Arthur singing, almost as though it were an adolescent malady his son would have to survive. He was far more available to Peanut, Crunch, and Red than he was to Arthur. This made Arthur jealous, and jealousy made him work. He stayed at that piano, and he listened to everything. So that, if Paul's intention had been to discourage Arthur, his technique boomeranged. Later on, I understood Paul. I think I may have understood him, though dimly, even then. Paul did not know if Arthur knew why he was singing. It was something Arthur had come to all alone, and at the age of 13. He had not claimed to be saved. He had not been baptized. He had been christened at birth, but that is not baptism. And yet he sang. Indeed he sang. And there was something frightening about so deep and unreadable a passion in one so young. Arthur's phrasing was the key, unanswerable. His delivery of the song made you realize that he knew what the song was about. Your reaction to this passion can destroy the singer. Paul knew this and Arthur didn't. Paul marshaled the other boys around his men as son, for he knew why they were singing. The boys thought they knew too. He knew they would not sing long. Something would get in the way. But if anything got in Arthur's way, Paul would be missing a son. So he labored every weekend, my old man with the stick-down hair, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday evening. It was out of jealousy and curiosity that Arthur joined them, and that's how the quartet got started. Arthur wasn't really anxious to surrender his solo status. He really dug being alone up there. But on the other hand, it was more of a challenge and more fun being up there with the others, and he learned more that way. Paul had painted him into a corner, where he would not work with Arthur without the others. And teaching the others, he was teaching and guiding his son. Paul asked, "What do you guys want to start with?" Crunch strums the guitar and suggests, "When was Jesus born?" "We don't need so much work on that," Arthur says. "We ought to work on Oh, Come All Ye Faithful. We ain't together on that at all." "That's true," Peanut says glumly, being the lead singer on that number. "Well, I agree," says Crunch quickly. "I just thought that we could use it to loosen up with, get some fire falling. It's cold, and Come Ye is a cold song." "Why do you say that, man?" Red asked. "It's slow, but it ain't necessarily cold." "Oh, we're going to pump some heat into it. Niggas can pump heat into anything. But the song is cold, joyful and triumphant. I always have a little trouble with that line," and Crunch grins. "You don't feel joyful and triumphant, son?" Paul asks mildly, and grins, striking the opening chord on the piano. "Well, anyway, if that's the hard one, let's start with that. How are we doing it?" They're in trouble with the long, solemn opening. They're trying to find a way to make it less solemn and more sacred. Arthur finally substitutes a "Come on, y'all" for "Come ye," which cracks everybody up. And they have to start all over again. But Arthur's invention has helped. I can't describe it. I wasn't there. It's futile for me to try to describe it. At Baldwin, perhaps I really feel that such an attitude is very close to insolence. I have too much respect for the people out of whom the music comes. Well, by the time I got home that particular Saturday afternoon, they were well into their final number, "Savior, Don't Pass Me By." Arthur sang the lead on this number, and I heard his voice above all the others as I climbed the stairs. Paul looked wringing wet and weary, and his hair was standing up. Now he was following the children whose voices filled the room. "Savior." And then again, "Savior." A pause, and the guitar and the piano, then the soloist. "Savior, don't you pass me by." All of the voices forming a kind of rumbling witness wailing wall. "Savior, Savior." Arthur alone, eyes closed, meaning every instant of it, beginning high like a scream and then dropping low like a whispered prayer. A prayer whispered in a dungeon. "Don't you pass me by." Whatever I know or don't know, I will never forget the faces I saw that afternoon as I walked into the room unnoticed. These are boys, street boys, rough and ugly, in the streets anyway. They stole, they lied, they fought, they cheated. When they stole, they ran. When they were caught, they lied. When they were beaten, they cursed and cried. Yes, I was there, I know. They played handball, football, basketball, boxed, dreamed of becoming champions. They had started to smoke. Some smoked marijuana. Some had gone further than that. They believed that they hated white people, and that's no wonder. They were far from the hard apprehension that they simply could not endure being despised. Far from the knowledge that almost everybody is. Could not conceive that the world, or at least the world we know, could be so tremendously populated by people who despise each other because each despises himself. No, they dreamed of safety. I was dreaming too. They could not know that they stood in a kind of timeless and universal danger, being like all men, the Word made flesh. Thus they imagined that they hated white people because they were not black, and could not imagine that they terrified white people because white people are not white. Their faces and their voices tell the promise of the promised land, but we never see our faces. The singer rarely hears his song. Paul stands up saying, "Well, that's all for now," and takes a handkerchief out of his back pocket and wipes his face. "What about our encores?" Arthur asks, and Paul and the others laugh. "There are going to be 3 quartets up there," Paul says, "and you're all the youngest and the newest. You going on first and you coming off first. Believe me, you coming down from there. And little Sister Julia Miller waiting to preach her sermon too? You ain't going to be having too much time for encores." "And," says Crunch, "them silver nightingales got their mojo working. We try to do encores. Our tonsils liable to pop all over the altar." "We ought to be ready," Arthur says, "anyway." He says to the boys to stare at him. Then they all turn helplessly toward Paul. "Don't look at me," Paul tells him. "Go on and have your summit meeting. When you got it all together, let me know." He walks to me and winks. "Come on, buddy, let me buy you a drink." Well, I was of age now, and we sometimes hung out a little on Saturday afternoons. Mama often worked late on Saturday because the lady of the family that loved her so much had bridge parties or bingo games or God knows what. Orgies, who gives a shit? At her house on Saturdays, the proceeds to go to charity, and Mama had to stay and clean up. Paul got his coat and we started down the stairs, leaving the boys shouting at each other. Paul let out his breath and I was about to sympathize with his weariness, but he said, "They're not bad, those little bastards. Maybe something will come of it after all." One thing he said, they work. I'll give them that. And he was smiling as we hit the streets, which were bitter cold and almost empty. We started down the avenue toward Paul's favorite bar, which is still standing, thank the Lord, one of the few remaining witnesses to my youth. But I've hardly ever drunk with Arthur in this bar, perhaps because the younger brother can never be a witness to the older brother's youth. These were my afternoons with my fun. The cancer of television had not yet attacked every organ of the social body, and so the bar was quiet, with muted conversation, a laugh here and there. The jukebox may have been playing low. A few of Paul's buddies were there, and on those afternoons Paul always said, "And this is my son Hall," like it was nothing at all. But I could see in his buddies' eyes that they dug he didn't think it was nothing at all. They looked at him with a quickening of love and a little jealousy. Then they looked at me, and I could see in their eyes that my father was proud of me. I didn't know why he was proud of me. I didn't know what I'd done to make him proud. But he was. I could see that in the eyes of his friends, and it filled me with a happiness I feel until today. I swore I'd never do anything to make him ashamed, and I don't think I did. I really don't believe I did. Thank God I can say that. And the moment I say that, I think of Arthur. And I know, if I'm honest, that Arthur didn't think that he could say that. I know better, but I would. I knew our father better than he did. That was because my life as a man had begun. My suffering had begun. I had my father to turn to, but Arthur had only me, and I was not enough. We sat down at a table near the window. Paul took off his hat. His hair was still untidy. In spite of the cold air through which we had passed, his face was still a little damp. "What are we going to do with your brother?" he asked. "I think he might turn into a real musician. I mean a real musician," he added, "not like me." I didn't want to pick him up on his "not like me." I felt a chill go through me, as hard as the streets outside, because I knew he knew that I understood perfectly well what he meant. Paul made his living as a pianist when he could. When he couldn't, he did other things, but he wasn't talking about making a living. At the same time, I was far more skeptical than Paul concerning Arthur's being a musician. I knew that Paul knew more about music than Arthur, or than anybody for planets around. What I didn't see was that it was this authority which informed his judgment. He, Paul, would know. I really believed that all this was merely part of Arthur's adolescence, that he would outgrow it and become a somewhat more predictable creature. But Paul only pretended to believe it, which is probably why his face remained damp and why his hair was standing up. Paul ordered, and we waited for our drinks in silence, a silence charged yet peaceful. Our drinks came, and Paul said, "I've been close to music all my life, loved it all my life, but I swear I never hoped to see no son of mine turn to music." He laughed and lifted his glass to me and sipped his bourbon. "I guess you think I better be glad I'm talking about my son and not my daughter." He stopped laughing and looked down. He took another sip of bourbon. He sighed, what almost sounded like a mortal sigh. "Ah." "You're worried," I said. "Why? If he wants to be a musician, a singer, what's wrong with that?" "Nothing," Paul said, "except that it's going to burn him up, burn him every hour that he lives, char the flesh from the bone, man, leave that for someone to gather up and bury. And," he finished his bourbon and looked at me, "that someone is most likely going to be you." I wanted to laugh, but I didn't laugh. I watched my father's face. He looked into the streets. "Music don't begin like a song," he said. "Forget all that bullshit you hear. Music can get to be a song, but it starts with a cry. That's all. It might be the cry of a newborn baby, or the sound of a hog being slaughtered, or a man when they put the knife to his balls. And that sound is everywhere. People spend their whole lives trying to drown out that sound." As the kids would say today, Paul was taking me on a far-out trip, and I wasn't sure I wanted to make it. But laughter closed her stone gates in my face. I could almost hear the boom. "Oh," said Paul, looking at the street, but he might have been looking at a river. "There are other sounds. The sound of water. That can drive you crazy. It has been used to drive people crazy. I bet if you think about it, you can't think of a single sound that you can live with. That's why we live with so many. Each drowns out the other." He looked down into his empty glass. "I bet you think your old man's crazy." I started to make a joke, but I couldn't. And then I said, "No, I don't think you're crazy. If you ever had to think about it, How we get from sound to music? Lord, I don't know. It seems to prove to me that love is in the world. Without it, music I mean, we'd all be running around with our fangs dripping blood. He laughed. He could. Maybe I am crazy. He was frightening me suddenly, and he realized it. He ordered another round and sat staring out of the window again, and I realized for the first time how mightily he was troubled. What about Arthur? I asked lamely, and without knowing why, dreading the answer. He was silent for a while. Our drinks came, and still he sat there, leaning on his elbows, looking out of the window. I used to run with some girls and boys when I was young, he said, and they were beautiful, let me tell you. I won't go into what happened to some of them. Some are still around. They were beautiful, like I say. Trouble was when they weren't singing or playing, didn't nobody know what to do with them. They didn't know either. Those that found out something when they weren't singing or playing, well, it took them a while, and they paid some dues. God knows they loved, and God knows they hurt, but looked like they could only do it in public. He grinned, suddenly a strange, sad grin, which made him look very young, almost as young as Arthur. And there was swiftly a resonance of Arthur in his face. This was Arthur's father, too. We were the issue of this man's loins. Now I felt my face beginning to be damp. Some, like me, knew what to do and how to do it. It was sweat, but it was no sweat, if you see what I mean. Or sweat was all it was. But some did not know from one note to the next if they were going to make it. They almost never failed, but they never knew. They always looked like a kid who got what he wanted for Christmas when they left the last notes hanging out there in the air and they came off the stage or the floor. Lord, they were beautiful, but they damn sure couldn't count to 10, and they couldn't keep house. They loved their kids, but their kids didn't always know it. They didn't always remember the kid's name. They didn't always remember the wife or the husband or the sweetheart's name. And that didn't mean that they didn't love them. But who's going to be able to figure that out? How are you going to believe that somebody loves you when they're way off someplace and look at you like you some bit of dust in the desert about 2,000 miles away? How are you going to imagine that if you leave that person, she's going to cry her eyes out and maybe try to die? But you don't know. He looked down and sipped his bourbon and looked out of the window again. Then he looked at me, looked me directly in the eye. You understand me, son? I think I do, I said. I think I do. I think you do, he said. Then, I had a girl like that down yonder when I was about your age, before I met your mama. That's what started me playing. I played for her. I asked, what happened to her? Paul said, I don't know. We had a fight. She went away. I tried to find her, but I never heard from her again. Is that why you're talking about Arthur? Yes? No? Then, listen, I've been telling you something I got to tell you, because time is what time is, man. And I know you love your brother. I know that. Much better than you do. But I don't want you to think that I married your mama because some wild chick left me. That ain't the case. Lord, if life was that simple, wouldn't be no need for music, no need for prayer. I love the girl, that's true. The way a youngster loves. But don't think I don't love your mother. Don't think I don't love you. I might never have been born, I said, smiling, if she hadn't left you. I asked you before, he said, if you understood me. And do you? Yes, I said, and I looked at him. Yes, I do. He said after a moment, I tell you all this because, yes, I am talking about Arthur. Lord, it's a mystery. He looked down, looked out, then looked at me. Son, let me tell you one thing. Don't ever run from nothing. I swear to you, whatever you run from will come back one day. Armed to the teeth, man. Will come back in a shape you don't know how to run from. Will come back in a shape you can't deny. He swallowed his bourbon. I look at Arthur and I think of that girl. That girl I ain't seen since I was 20 odd. And I have to see that what drove me to her is exactly what brought Arthur here. And I'm going to carry it just as far as I can. But I know by and by I'm going to have to leave it with you. My time ain't long. A father's time ain't never long, no matter how long it is. That's why. He raised his glass and grinned. I'm taking the liberty of borrowing some of yours. Then I laughed. It was his grin that did it. I was both terrified and relieved. We touched glasses and drank. And at that moment, the streets outside seemed to invade our haven, began resounding in my skull. I looked out of the window. Standing on the corner, their backs to us, waiting for the light to change, were Peanut, Arthur, Crunch, and Red, still arguing, now in pantomime. Paul looked out, and saw them. He smiled and nodded his head from an unimaginable distance. and with a light in his eyes that I'd never seen in anybody's eyes before. Something happened to make the boys laugh. Arthur lunged at Crunch. Crunch grabbed Arthur by the nape of the neck with one hand and whirled, turning Arthur with him, with the guitar held high above his head. The lights changed. They charged across the street. Crunch seemed to sing like an arrow, lifting tiny Arthur above the ground. Red and Peanut, on either side of them, knew something we didn't know.
James Baldwin's novels include Go Tell It on the Mountain, Giovanni's Room, Another Country, Tell Me How Long the Train's Been Gone, If Beale Street Could Talk, Little Man, A Story of Childhood, and Just Above My Head. His collections of essays include Notes of a Native Son, Nobody Knows My Name, The Fire Next Time, No Name in the Streets, and The Devil Finds Work. His plays are Blues for Mr. Charlie, The Amen Corner, One Day When I Was Lost, and a dramatization of Giovanni's Room. He's also the author of 2 collections of short stories, Going to Meet the Man, and This Morning, This Evening, So Soon. The American Audio Prose Library is a comprehensive collection of distinguished American writers reading and discussing their work. It's produced by Kay Benetti and Julie Humans at KOPN Radio. The music is by Archie Shepp and Horace Parlin. For information about other writers in this series, write us, the American Audio Prose Library, 915 East Broadway, Columbia, Missouri, 65201. This project is made possible with financial assistance from KOPN Radio, the Missouri Arts Council, and the National Endowment for the Arts.